Paris, 1925. The air inside the luxury suite of the Hôtel de Crillon is thick with the scent of expensive cigars and the suffocating silence of a multi-million-franc deal. André Poisson is sweating. His hands tremble as he pushes a leather briefcase across the polished mahogany table. Inside lies a fortune, 1 million francs in cold, hard cash. His life savings, his reputation, his future. Across from him sits a man who radiates nothing but bored, bureaucratic authority. He looks like a high-ranking official. He talks like a diplomat. He even carries the official seal of the French Republic. The man reaches out, clicks the briefcase shut, and offers a thin, calculated smile. "Congratulations, Monsieur Poisson," he whispers. "The Eiffel Tower is now yours." But there's a problem. A massive, world-class problem. The man counting the money isn't a government official. He doesn't work for the Ministry of Posts. In fact, he's a convicted con artist who's been banned from half the countries in Europe. His name is Victor Lustig, and he just sold the world's most iconic landmark to a man who will never see a single cent of his money again. How did a single man convince the elite of Paris that the government was secretly scrapping their national treasure? How did he manage to walk out of the most prestigious hotel in France with a briefcase full of cash without a single alarm being raised? And more importantly, how did he manage to do it twice? Welcome to the story of the greatest scam in human history. A masterclass in greed, psychology, and the terrifying power of looking like you belong. Before we dive into the blueprint of the heist that shocked the world, ask yourself one thing. If someone offered you the deal of a lifetime today, would you be smart enough to walk away? Or would you end up like André Poisson? To understand how a man could sell the Eiffel Tower, you first have to understand the man himself. Victor Lustig wasn't born a criminal. He was born a genius. And that is exactly what made him so dangerous. Born in 1890 in the small town of Hostinay, in what was then Austria-Hungary, Lustig didn't come from a line of thieves. He came from a world that valued education and status. By the time he was 20, he was a linguistic chameleon, speaking 5 languages fluently: German, French, English, Italian, and his native Czech. But Victor didn't want to be a translator or a diplomat. He realized early on that a brilliant mind, paired with a silver tongue, was the ultimate master key. He didn't just want to earn money, he wanted to engineer it. His first office wasn't a corporate building, it was the deck of a transatlantic ocean liner. In the early 1920s, these massive ships were floating palaces for the world's wealthiest elite. Bored millionaires, trapped on a boat for a week, with nothing but time and a desire to prove their status. Lustig would stroll through the first-class lounges, dressed in custom-tailored suits, radiating an aura of quiet, immense wealth. He was the perfect gentleman. He would join poker games, not to win a few $100s, but to study the players. He observed their tells, their insecurities, and most importantly, their greed. He didn't cheat in the way a street thug would. He manipulated the atmosphere. He would let his victims win just enough to make them feel superior. Then, when the stakes were at their peak, he would vanish with their fortunes before the ship even hit the docks in New York. This was his laboratory. This was where he perfected the 10 commandments of the con. He learned that a con artist should never look like a con artist. They should look like a solution. By the time Lustig arrived in Paris in 1925, he wasn't just a scammer, he was a master of human psychology. He understood a fundamental truth about the human brain. People don't see the world as it is. They see the world as they want it to be. If you look official enough, people will grant you power. If you look rich enough, people will give you their money to feel like they belong in your circle. Paris in the mid-20s was the perfect ecosystem for a predator like Lustig. The city was recovering from the Great War, the economy was a roller coaster, and the government was buried under a mountain of bureaucracy and debt. It was a city of desperate dreams and crumbling infrastructure. And in the middle of it all, standing tall and rusting under the weight of its own maintenance costs, was the Iron Lady. To the public, it was a symbol of France. To the government, it was an expensive headache. But to Victor Lustig, as he sat in a quiet cafe reading the morning paper, it was the greatest opportunity in the history of crime. May 1925. Paris is a city of lights, but for Victor Lustig, the shadows were much more interesting. He's sitting at a small sidewalk cafe, sipping an espresso, flipping through the morning edition of the newspaper. His eyes stop on a headline that would change his life and the history of crime forever. It wasn't a story about a bank robbery or a political scandal. It was a mundane article about a public nuisance. The headline read, "The Eiffel Tower, a national burden?" Lustig leaned in. The article detailed how the tower, built for the 1889 World's Fair, was never intended to be permanent. It was supposed to be dismantled in 1909, 20 years after its construction. But because it proved useful for radio transmissions, the government kept it standing. By 1925, the Iron Lady was showing her age. She was rusting. She was peeling. The cost of painting and maintaining 7,000 tons of iron was hemorrhaging the French treasury, a treasury already depleted by the scars of World War I. Public opinion was turning. Many Parisians viewed it as an eyesore, a giant, useless skeleton of the past that cost too much to keep alive. There were whispers in the halls of government. Maybe it's time to tear it down. Maybe we should just sell it for scrap. To any ordinary citizen, this was just news. To a businessman, it was a tragedy. But to Victor Lustig, it was a blueprint. He didn't just see a newspaper article. He saw a gap in reality. He understood that if the government was secretly thinking about selling the tower, they would need someone to manage the deal. Someone official, someone discreet, someone exactly like him. Lustig closed the paper, paid for his coffee, and began to walk. His mind was already racing at 100 miles per hour. Think about the scale of this. He wasn't planning to steal a painting or rob a vault. He was going to sell a 300-meter-tall, 7,000-ton landmark that was visible from every window in Paris. It was so bold, so utterly insane, that he knew it just might work. Because who would be crazy enough to fake the sale of the Eiffel Tower? The audacity was his armor. But a plan this big required more than just an idea. It required a stage. He couldn't sell the tower from a back alley. He needed the highest level of credibility. He needed to become the French government itself. He went back to his room and began to draft a list. He didn't need a weapon. He needed stationery. He needed the perfect ink. He needed to find the one man in Paris who was ambitious enough to buy the impossible and foolish enough to believe he was the only one invited to the table. The target was no longer just a person. The target was the pride of France. And Victor Lustig was about to put a for sale sign on it. Victor Lustig knew that in the world of high-stakes deception, the devil isn't just in the details, the devil is the details. To sell the Eiffel Tower, he didn't need to be a salesman. He needed to be a ghost in the machinery of the French government. His first stop wasn't the tower itself, but a dimly lit printing shop in the outskirts of Paris. This wasn't a place for wedding invitations or business cards. This was a sanctuary for forgers. Lustig arrived with a specific request. He needed the exact stationery used by the Ministère des Postes et Télégraphes, the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs, the department technically responsible for the tower's upkeep. He didn't just want a close-enough copy. He obsessed over the weight of the paper, the specific shade of cream, and the embossed seal of the French Republic. He studied the signatures of real officials, practicing the confident, flowing cursive of a man who signs away millions of francs before lunch. When he walked out of that shop, he held a stack of blank letters that looked more official than the ones on the minister's own desk. But documents are just paper without a stage. Lustig knew that if he invited businessmen to a dusty government office, they would see the cracks in the walls. Instead, he chose the Hôtel de Crillon. This wasn't just a hotel. It was an institution of power located right on the Place de la Concorde. It was where world leaders stayed. By booking a luxury suite here, he was buying an invisible shield of legitimacy. If a man is staying at the Crillon, the world assumes he belongs there. Now, he needed his whales, the scrap metal dealers. Lustig didn't just pick names at random. He spent days in the public library, scouring business directories and trade journals. He was looking for a very specific psychological profile. He needed men who were successful enough to have the cash, but ambitious enough to be blinded by the chance to elevate their social standing. He narrowed it down to 6 top scrap metal dealers in Paris. To them, he sent the forged letters, marked with a bold red stamp, strictly confidential. The letters were a masterpiece of bureaucratic baiting. They didn't mention the tower by name. They spoke of urgent government infrastructure disposal and invited the recipients to a private meeting at the Hôtel de Crillon to discuss a contract of unprecedented national scale. Lustig understood the law of exclusive access. By making the meeting secret and limited to only 6 people, he instantly made every one of them feel like a member of an elite inner circle. He triggered their competitive instincts before they even knew what they were bidding on. Finally, there was the transformation of Victor Lustig himself. He visited the finest tailors in Paris, ordering a dark, conservative suit that screamed, "Reliable civil servant." He trimmed his mustache to a precise professional length. He practiced his walk, not the hurried pace of a hustler, but the slow, deliberate stride of a man who has spent 20 years navigating the halls of power. He wasn't just Victor Lustig anymore. He was the Deputy Director General of the Ministry. He was a man with a heavy burden, a man carrying a state secret, a man who was about to offer 6 strangers the keys to the most famous monument on Earth. Everything was in place. The bait was set. The stage was lit. All he had to do was wait for the knock on the door. The gold-leafed doors of the suite at the Hôtel de Crillon opened. One by one, the 6 most powerful scrap metal dealers in Paris walked in. They were met with an atmosphere of heavy, somber importance. Victor Lustig didn't stand up immediately. He kept them waiting for just a few seconds, long enough to establish who held the power in the room. When he finally rose, he didn't offer a salesman's grin. He offered a weary, professional nod. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice low and steady. "What we discuss today stays within these walls. If a word of this reaches the press before the ink is dry, the Republic will deny everything, and your companies will be blacklisted forever." He laid out the bait. He explained the deteriorating state of the Eiffel Tower. He used technical terms: oxidation, structural fatigue, fiscal liability. He made it sound like the tower wasn't a monument, but a dangerous pile of junk that the government was desperate to get rid of. The dealers were hooked. They saw 7,000 tons of high-grade iron. They saw the contract of the century. But Lustig was watching them like a hawk. He wasn't looking at their notebooks. He was looking at their eyes. He noticed André Poisson. Poisson was the new money in the room. He was wealthy, yes, but he lacked the social standing of the old Parisian elite. He was anxious. He was leaning forward. He wanted this deal not just for the money, but for the legacy. He wanted to be the man who bought the Eiffel Tower. To cement the deal, Lustig took them on a tour. He didn't need a permit. He simply took them to the tower early in the morning, before the gates officially opened. Because he carried himself with such absolute authority, the security guards didn't even ask for his ID. They just stepped aside. This special access was the final proof the dealers needed. But then, the masterstroke. Lustig called Poisson for a private meeting. This was the moment where most scammers would push for the sale. But Lustig did the opposite. He looked nervous. He looked shifty. "Monsieur Poisson," Lustig whispered, looking over his shoulder. "Being a government official is expensive. My salary is small. The pressures of Paris life are great. Do you understand?" He was asking for a bribe. In any other world, a government official asking for a bribe is a red flag. But in the twisted logic of a con, it was the ultimate green light. Poisson thought to himself, if he's asking for a bribe, he must be a real corrupt bureaucrat. A scammer wouldn't risk asking for more money. They'd just want the contract signed. By admitting a weakness, his greed, Lustig proved his authenticity. Poisson didn't just agree to the bribe. He thanked Lustig for the opportunity to pay it. He felt like an insider. He felt safe. He went home, gathered every franc he owned, and prepared to hand over a fortune for a monument that Victor Lustig had no right to sell. The trap wasn't just set. The victim was walking into it with a smile on his face. The briefcase was heavy, heavier than any Victor Lustig had ever carried. Inside was over 1.2 million francs, a mixture of the purchase price and the personal bribe from André Poisson. In 1925, this was enough money to live like a king for 10 lifetimes. Lustig didn't head to a bar to celebrate. He didn't go back to the Eiffel Tower to take a final look. He walked straight to the Gare de l'Est railway station. Within 2 hours of receiving the cash, he was on a train steaming toward Vienna. He sat in a first-class cabin, watching the French countryside blur past the window, and he did something most criminals forget to do. He waited. Back in Paris, André Poisson was also waiting. He waited for the official demolition permits. He waited for the government trucks to arrive. He waited for the keys to the most famous gate in the world. 1 week passed, then 2. Poisson's phone calls to the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs were met with confusion. A contract for the Eiffel Tower? Monsieur, you must be mistaken. We are painting the tower, not selling it. Slowly, the ice-cold realization began to settle in Poisson's gut. The hotel suite, the official seals, the deputy director general. It was all a ghost. He hadn't just lost his money. He had become the punchline of a joke that hadn't even been told yet. And here is where Lustig's genius truly shines. He knew Poisson wouldn't go to the police. Why? Because of the bribe. In the eyes of the law, Poisson wasn't just a victim. He was a co-conspirator. To report the fraud, he would have to admit he tried to bribe a government official. He would have to admit to the entire world, his business rivals, his family, the Parisian socialites, that he was the biggest fool in France. Lustig had gambled on Poisson's ego, and he won. Poisson chose silence. He absorbed the massive financial loss and buried the secret, hoping the world would never find out. From his luxury hotel in Vienna, Lustig checked the French newspapers every morning, day after day, month after month. Nothing. No police reports, no scandal, no warrant for his arrest. Most people would take the money and run to a private island. But Victor Lustig wasn't most people. He was addicted to the game. He saw the silence not as a lucky break, but as a proof of concept. If it worked once, and the victim was too embarrassed to speak, why wouldn't it work again? 6 months later, the ghost returned to Paris. Same hotel, same forged documents, same strictly confidential letters. Lustig invited a new group of scrap metal dealers to the Hôtel de Crillon. He delivered the same speech about the rusting, iron lady. He even took them on the same early morning tour. He was days away from collecting a second fortune for a monument he had already sold once before. He was on the verge of pulling off the impossible, selling the Eiffel Tower twice. But as the saying goes, greed is the one thing that can blind even a master manipulator. While the first group of dealers was blinded by ambition, one man in the second group had something they didn't: a suspicious mind. He didn't just look at the documents, he checked the ink. He didn't just listen to the speech, he called the actual ministry and asked to speak with the real director. When the police were finally tipped off, the dragnet began to close. Lustig felt the shift in the air. His sixth sense for danger, sharpened by years of card sharking on ocean liners, told him the game was over. He didn't wait for the money this time. He abandoned the suite, abandoned his luggage, and slipped out the back door of the Crillon just minutes before the authorities arrived. He fled across the border to Austria, and then he set his sights on a new frontier. A place where the money was bigger, the marks were richer, and a man with 5 languages and a silver tongue could reinvent himself entirely. Victor Lustig was heading to America, and the United States was about to meet the man who had outsmarted the Republic of France. America in the late 1920s was a land of opportunity, especially for a man who knew how to manufacture it. Victor Lustig arrived in New York not as a refugee, but as a predator entering a new hunting ground. He changed his name, his backstory, and his tactics. But he kept the one thing that never failed him: his understanding of human nature. In the United States, Lustig didn't just target businessmen. He targeted the king of the underworld himself, Al Capone. This is perhaps the most dangerous con Lustig ever performed. He didn't try to steal from Capone. He did something much smarter. He approached Capone with a proposition. "Give me $50,000, and I will double it in 60 days through a secret investment." Capone, a man who killed people for looking at him wrong, gave him the money. Lustig took the $50,000, put it in a safe deposit box, and did absolutely nothing. For 2 months, he lived in constant fear that Capone's hitmen would find him. But when the 60 days were up, Lustig returned to Capone's office. He looked defeated. "Mr. Capone," he sighed, handing back the original $50,000. "The deal fell through. I've lost my own money, but I couldn't bear to lose yours." Capone was stunned. In a world of thieves and betrayers, he had finally found an honest man. Capone was so impressed by Lustig's supposed integrity that he gave him $5,000 just to help him get back on his feet. Lustig walked away with $5,000 of the mob's money, and more importantly, he walked away with his life. He had conned Al Capone by telling the truth, a move so meta, so brilliant, that it remains a legend in the annals of crime. But the money from small cons wasn't enough for a man who had sold the Eiffel Tower. Lustig turned to a more industrial scale of crime: counterfeiting. Partnering with a chemist named Tom Shaw, Lustig began producing Lustig money, counterfeit $100 bills so perfect that they fooled even the most experienced bank tellers. At one point, they were pumping over $100,000 of fake currency into the American economy every single month. It was a flood of ghost cash that threatened to destabilize the US monetary system. This was his undoing. You can embarrass a businessman, and he might stay quiet. You can trick a mobster, and he might respect you. But when you challenge the United States Treasury, you are inviting a war you cannot win. The Secret Service began a manhunt that spanned years. Lustig was a ghost, changing identities like shirts. But eventually, the same thing that saved him in Paris failed him in New York: loyalty. In 1935, his mistress, Billie May, discovered he was having an affair. In a fit of jealous rage, she made an anonymous phone call to the authorities. Within hours, the man who sold the Eiffel Tower was cornered in Manhattan. Even then, Lustig had one last trick. While awaiting trial in the Federal House of Detention, he crafted a rope out of bed sheets, disguised himself as a window washer, and climbed down the side of the building in broad daylight. He vanished into the New York crowds, leaving the FBI humiliated. But the net was too tight. He was recaptured weeks later in Pittsburgh. In the courtroom, Lustig didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a fallen aristocrat. He was sentenced to 20 years in the world's most inescapable prison, Alcatraz. The man who spoke 5 languages, who dined with millionaires, and who sold the most famous monument in history, spent his final days in a 5 by 9 foot cell. On his death certificate in 1947, the clerk wrote, "Apprentice salesman" under his occupation. It was the final irony. Victor Lustig spent his whole life proving he was the master of everyone he met, only to die as a nameless statistic in the middle of the San Francisco Bay. The Eiffel Tower still stands today, a monument of iron and rivets. It is a reminder of French engineering, yes. But for those who know the story of the Count, it is also a 7,000-ton tombstone for the greatest con man who ever lived. Victor Lustig's life teaches us one terrifying lesson. The more official something looks, the more we should doubt it. Because the biggest lies are never told in back alleys. They are told in luxury suites, on official letterheads, and with a confident smile. But before we close the file on Victor Lustig, I have one question for you. Imagine you are André Poisson. You've just realized you've been scammed out of your life savings by a man who sold you a landmark you can see from your bedroom window. Would you have gone to the police, risking your reputation and facing the world's mockery? Or would you have done what he did, swallowed your pride and stayed silent? It's a harder choice than you think. Let me know in the comments below. Is Victor Lustig the most brilliant mind in criminal history? Or was he just lucky to live in a world blinded by greed? I'll be hearting the most interesting perspectives. If you found this masterclass in deception fascinating, hit that like button. It helps us keep the lights on and brings you more stories of history's most daring outlaws. And if you're not subscribed yet, ask yourself, what other secrets are you missing? I'm for your channel name. And remember, if a deal looks too official to be fake, that's exactly when you should start looking for the exit. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.